morning, everyone. In 2012, Good morning, everyone. In 2012, we were pleased to publish our first book, Jugaad Innovation, which has sold over 100,000 copies in India. In this book, we studied the unique Indian way of innovating. We actually showcased amazing Indian entrepreneurs, such as Manshukh Prajapati, a porter by training who developed a fridge made entirely of clay. Arish Ande was brought solar energy to over 250,000 households in some of the remotest parts of India. We also looked at how multinationals like General Electric are developing low-cost medical devices like this ECG device that a doctor can carry on his bicycle to go consult patients in remote villages. And across all these examples we investigated, we gleaned out something which is very unique to us Indians, which is a Jugaad mindset. And we looked at the fact that marketing can actually benefit from the Jugaad mindset as well, as Valerie Wagner has shown with Zip Dial, which actually uses missed calls to run successful marketing campaigns. They have converted 400 million missed calls into a highly profitable business model. When we looked at this Jugaad mindset, of course, we looked at the fact that these entrepreneurs are not only frugal, but actually they're also resilient and very inclusive in their approach to innovation. And to our surprise, we discovered that this need for doing better with less and the need for applying the Jugaad mindset is also growing in the Western world. And I want to invite my co-author, Jaideep, to explain why this is happening.
Thank you, Navi. Good morning, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be here with you this morning. So as Navi was saying, we published Jugaad Innovation in 2012, and that book was very much about how people in emerging markets like India do better with less. But when that book came out in 2012, we realized there was a lot of interest in frugal innovation in the West, for the West. So Navi and I started to look at that to understand what was going on. And we realized that post-financial crisis, Western consumers were also facing budgetary constraints, and so were governments. But there was something else going on in the West. We realized that there was a growing number of people we call prosumers. These are consumers who are no longer passive recipients of products and services from companies. They're much more actively involved in the economic process. And we realized that they were driving three movements: the sharing economy, the maker movement, and the circular economy. Now, the sharing economy we're all familiar with, where you and I can trade spare assets with each other directly on a digital platform. But I want to talk a little bit more about the maker movement and the circular economy. The maker movement is where now increasingly small teams of people, sometimes 4 people like our students, can do things that only large companies or the government could do 10 or 20 years ago. And an example of this is a former student of mine, Eben Upton in Cambridge, who with his colleagues came up with a very cheap computer that you see in his hand, the Raspberry Pi. This is a $30 computer to enable young people to be able to tinker and also code. And initially they thought they might sell a few thousand units to kids, but they've ended up selling several million of them, not only to kids, but often to their parents, including the dads who come together with other makers, combine these cheap computers with sensors and webcams, and develop other frugal devices, Internet of Things devices. And they do this in spaces like maker spaces, and they come together in big events like maker fairs where they demonstrate things that they have done. And these are not just prototypes, they actually produce products and companies based on that. Here is one such company in Cambridge, Heartfelt Technologies, which have come up with this medical device that contains a lot of Raspberry Pis connected to cameras, and this is being used in healthcare. This device, in the morning when a person with a heart disease wakes up, will scan their feet and then transmit that data to the cloud, where AI will then analyze it and send a response to a nurse who can, or a doctor who can then look at the patient. So we see these kinds of possibilities now with the maker movement. But I now also want to talk about the circular economy. This is where companies are now reusing, reducing, and recycling the use of materials in their products. Like Levi's with this line of jeans called Wasteless, where something like 20% of the material comes from recycled plastic bottles. And in fact, Navi is wearing one of those jeans this morning. So that was one of their lines. Another line they came up with was waterless, where in their factories they reduced the amount of water needed to make these jeans by something like 90%. So companies are doing this in their supply chain and in their manufacturing, but they realize a large part of the imprint, the environmental footprint, is in our use of their products in the home. For instance, with jeans, when we wash them, we use energy and water. So they started to approach that problem using marketing to nudge people to better practices. So their CEO, Chip Bergh, for instance, started this dialogue by saying, you know, you don't actually need to wash your jeans that often. I haven't washed mine in a year. And that got a whole debate going. A lot of scientific studies were done. And also, they followed up with a campaign, the Save Water campaign, which encouraged people to come up with new ideas to save water, including perhaps showering in your jeans, which you may try sometime, maybe fun to do. Now, that's, companies who are trying to do this. Here's another example of how marketing can nudge us to be better consumers. This is IKEA, which combines elements of the circular economy with the sharing economy in this ad. Let's take a look.
Every day, millions
Consumers, through creative and very frugal campaigns such as this one, engaging with the circular economy and the sharing economy. But there are companies now that are placing these movements at the heart of the entire organization, like Unilever. When Paul Pullman took over as CEO in 2009, he launched the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which had this very ambitious target of doubling the revenues but halving the footprint by 2020. And this ambitious challenge to the organization has resulted in frugal innovation throughout the organization, from their supply chain, how their factories are designed and built and managed, to all their logistics. And also their products. They have designed products that are more environmentally friendly. So for instance, compressed deodorants, which use less metal, less gas, and emit less CO2 while maintaining performance. This has had very interesting financial consequences. The company has actually done better as a result of doing good. And it has also become a magnet for talent, attracting young people who want to work for companies like this. Paul Pullman has supported our work on frugal innovation, has been a champion of this, and has written the foreword of our new book, which Navi will now talk about, as we come full circle to look at how India plays a key role in frugal innovation.
Thanks, Jaideep. So this is why we are super, super excited here to be with you, because this is a historic moment, I think, for India. United Nations actually has defined what we call the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which actually outline how the world can become more sustainable and more inclusive by adopting these 17 goals, which have to do with access to clean energy, water, sanitation, education, finance, and gender equality, etc. But here is a super, super exciting news. It turns out that 50% of the contribution to the SDGs in the next decade will have to come from India. What that means? Well, that means that if we want to make the world sustainable, we have to make India sustainable. How do you do that? That's why we wrote this book, Do Better with Less, in which actually we encourage you as entrepreneurs, designers, and corporate leaders to reclaim global leadership of something we are masters at, which is frugal innovation. This art and science of doing not just more, but better with less. And it's really about not only creating more value, but increasingly we think it's about creating more values for shareholders, but also for society and for the planet in general, and do so in a way that also minimizes use of scarce resources by a factor of 10 and sometimes even 100x. And of course, how you go about doing it is where the proof will be found. And this is why we kind of came up with the 6 principles of frugal innovation in our book, which actually shows how brands can engage differently with customers to co-create these frugal solutions. We have 50-plus case studies in our book, including many entrepreneurs from India, and I want to kind of showcase 2 of them that actually are trailblazing some of the trends that Jaideep talked about. Sonia Manchanda is a designpreneur and a co-founder of Spread in Bangalore. She actually worked with the state government of Karnataka to encourage people to switch from consumption of rice to millet, which is a traditional grain. And it turns out that millet requires 15 times less water than rice to be produced and has 30 times more nutrients. And they use this incredible campaign to position millet as a superfood by educating the parents how by feeding millet to the children, they can turn their children into super kids in the future. Another favorite entrepreneur in India we showcase is Vaibhav Chabra in Bangalore, who has set up this makerspace called Makers Asylum, which is a high-tech workshop where any of us can walk in and build anything like a table. But if you're a doctor, you can actually walk there and even build your own medical device. And what's interesting is that recently they started teaming up with large companies like HUL, Hindustan Unilever, to build this thing called Plastic Safari, which is a mobile van that goes across the country to actually educate children how to recycle plastic waste to create new products. So in summary, we believe that customers are becoming more value and values conscious, and they're actually clamoring for products and services that have 7 sapta gunas, or 7 qualities. 3 of them are foundational. These have to do with affordability, accessibility, and simplicity. You guys know how to market them very, very well. But in the future, we believe that increasingly it will be important for you to also market the aspirational attributes of sustainability, quality, and desirability, and help build purpose-driven brands. This is where we believe that you can truly shine. With that, we want to really thank you for your attention, and we look forward to having an interactive discussion with you in the next 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen. If you could continue joining me on stage, we will take your Q&A session further. And to do the honors, let's invite onto the stage CEO, IPG Media Brands India and Secretary of the Advertising Club, Mr. Shashi Sinha.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
That was great going. I don't know if you mentioned the book is available outside for purchase.
That's correct, yes.
So those of you interested can go out. But before that, the questions. So the interesting question. There is a significant rise in Indian unemployment. Is there a way Jugaad Innovation can create self-employment through similar strategy?
Yes, and that's why we talked about the maker movement, because we actually think that it's time that policymakers and corporate leaders stop. There are 14 million young people entering the workforce in India, as you know, every year. So we should stop looking at these young people not as job takers, but as job makers. And this is really where the maker platforms, like the ones we talked about today, could be very powerful actually to turn these young people into entrepreneurs that create value not only for themselves and society, but potentially can become job generators as well.
The next one is, how to ensure you maintain the thin line between frugal innovation and low-quality product?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
How to ensure that you maintain the thin line between frugal innovation and a low-quality product?
That's a great question. I mean, sometimes, people have a negative view of Jugaad rightly because they associate it with low quality, with cutting corners and so on. So while that happens, we don't condone it. In fact, we were very explicit in the title of our book. It's Jugaad Innovation. It's how to do better with less. And so that, as Navi was saying, the Saptagunas, it's not enough to have something that's affordable. You also have to think about making it sustainable and having quality and aspirational. And that's where creativity comes in. And that's where having standards and aspirations and wanting to differentiate come in.
And finally, although India recorded the highest number of patents this year, we still lag behind, way behind China. How can this be improved?
We actually think it's time to redefine IP, intellectual property, as intellectual partnering. And I think this is where the notion of sharing economy becomes very important. And instead of cranking out more patents, we think that we have to learn to innovate better with less. And one thing that the European Commission has published a landmark report last year, arguing that rather than cranking out more patents, maybe it's time that we learn to combine, integrate, reuse existing knowledge and existing technologies. That means look at existing patents in one industry, like aerospace, and see how we can bring that, let's say, into a healthcare industry, for example. So instead of going into this kind of R&D arms race and try to benchmark ourselves against, China or the US, we should actually use a frugal approach to innovate, which consists in actually, reusing, recombining frugally the knowledge and the capabilities we already have.
So now you have the good task of selecting one question which you thought was the best of the three we asked.
I like the second one.
Which one? Go ahead.
The second one.
The second one was
The
good,
thin
yes.
line between frugal innovation and low quality product?
Yeah.
Why?
Yes.
So Shaloni Bhattacharya, congrats to you.
All right.
Congratulations, and we'd also like to take this moment to have the launch of the book that you have been talking about. So I'd also like to invite Mr. Ashish Bhasin, Mr. Nakul Chopra, and Mr. Jaideep Gandhi, if y'all could all come and join us onto the stage. That book that we have been talking about, we'd like to take this moment and have the launch of that as well. Could we have the books on stage, please?
Hey, good to see you again. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, let's do it in the front. Good idea. Very good idea. Oh, we? Yeah, right. Okay, sorry.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, how to do better with less.